Kelsey Richardson, and I'm career advisor at the CUNY School of Professional Studies. And welcome to our Interviewing Insights webinar. I'm so glad that you have all decided to join us today. We have Nikita Cassidy here also, who's our data and administrative coordinator, and she will be helping out as well on the Zoom. And so just to let you know what our agenda is for today, we're going to be going over some of the most important things to remember when it comes to interviewing. So we're going to talk about preparing for an interview, proper interview attire, telephone and virtual interviews, responding effectively to challenging questions, interviewing best practices, and then closing the interview and follow-up. And then after we finish covering all the content, I'm going to have Q&A time at the end of the webinar. So please feel free to send in your questions at any point in the chat during the webinar, and I will go to the chat at the end and I will answer as many questions as I can. So let me get started. So let's talk about preparing for the interview. Let me just first say that interviewing is one of those situations that can be very stressful, and you want to try to make it as easy as you can on yourself so that you're not very stressed out. So you want to kind of think about it in different ways. And if you think about it as your role during the interview being to promote yourself and gain more knowledge about the organization and position, and the interviewer's role is to learn more about you. So try to view it more as a conversation rather than an interrogation, which it can sometimes feel like, but think of it more as a conversation, again, where you're letting them know about you and you're learning about them and the organization. And then the interviewer is trying to learn more about whether you'd be a good fit for the job. And that can certainly put you more at ease if you think of it more as a conversation. And then also preparing carefully for the interview will definitely increase your confidence level overall. So as much preparation as you can put in beforehand, that can really help ease your nerves when the interview day arrives and you're actually going for the interview. So in terms of preparation, self-assessment and employer research are two of the most important steps in your preparation. So for self-assessment, it's really important. You must know yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, your career goals. And so you really want to give this some thought, and you want to make some notes to yourself beforehand so you'll be able to communicate these clearly to the interviewer. You want to do as much of that preparation beforehand, taking notes and thinking through how you're going to answer potential questions as much as you can, because that way, if you've already given it thought, then when they ask you questions on the day of the interview, the answers will roll off your tongue more easily. You'll be able to gather your thoughts more quickly because you already have an idea of examples you want to give or different things you want to say. And then employer research is another really important aspect of preparation. So you want to make sure that you have an extensive amount of information about the organization and the position that you're interviewing for. So there's a combination of how you can gather that information. Internet research, of course, is the most important way, and that can involve going to the organization's website, Googling to see if there are any recent articles on the organization, going to LinkedIn to look up your interviewer's profile and learn more about them. If the organization has a LinkedIn page there, you want to make sure that you look at that. So you just want to very thoroughly research the organization, because remember that there's sometimes when employers like to open up an interview, sometimes instead of, because the most common way is usually they'll say, thank you for being here. We appreciate you taking the time to interview with us. So tell us about yourself. I mean, that's the most common way. But they also sometimes instead might go, thank you for taking the time to interview with us. Now, why don't you first let us know, what do you know about us? And so if they start off the interview asking you, what do you know about them? And you haven't researched them, then the interview will not start off very well. So you want to make sure that you've really covered your research so that you can definitely give them a strong impression that you are a prepared candidate, who definitely prepares and you make sure that you have the knowledge that you need. So other preparation tips, you want to be able to discuss from memory everything that's on your resume. And what that means is, even though your resume is yours and you've lived it, obviously, you still, the night before each interview, I still recommend taking out your resume or pulling it up on the screen and looking over it, because you just want it fresh in your memory. And there might be ways that if you review your resume before each interview, there might be ways of looking at the resume when you have a certain particular position in mind that things jump out at you differently that you might want to talk to the interviewer about when they ask you a question. So definitely review it each time before an interview. You want to know why you want to work for the organization, what you have to offer, why you're the best fit for the position, those kinds of things. And you also want to allow more than enough time to be punctual for the interview if it's in person. So make sure that you leave well in advance. So if you live in the New York City area, for instance, and let's say you're in Brooklyn and the interview's in Manhattan, and normally it would take you 45 minutes to get to that part of Manhattan, then I would leave an hour and a half in advance to build in an extra 45 minutes just to be sure in case the subway is slow, or if you take a bus as part of your trip, like whatever transportation you're relying on, you just want to make sure that you have enough time in case there is a delay. And then if you do find yourself detained, make sure that you stop and notify the interviewer, send them an email from your phone or call if you have a number, and just calmly, just say, I really apologize. There's been a delay in my transportation, but, I will be there shortly. And just let them know. But you don't want to just show up late if you are detained. So it's better if you can give them a warning like that. And then you also want to make sure that you practice, 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 because practicing is just really incredibly important, again, because it helps you prepare and feel more knowledgeable as you enter the day of the interview. So let's touch on proper attire for the interview. So you should be prepared to wear your professional business attire for your interview, and that's whether the interview is in person or if it's done virtually. So you want to make sure, you know, I mean, I would say like professional business attire, that definition has changed over time, because it used to be that that was a much more dressed up kind of business attire, and it's not the same now. Now business attire is, it's almost like an upgraded version of business casual, but you still want to make sure that if you're in an industry like finance, then you're going to be dressing up a little bit more. If you're in IT or psychology or sociology, and it's nonprofits that you're dealing with, or tech firms, then that tends to be a little less dressed up. So it's going to be based on your industry exactly how dressed up you are, but just make sure that you dress up a little bit more than you would for the job if you actually had the job, because when you're doing the interview, it's your best foot forward. So you want to make sure that your attire does look professional. And once you get the job, of course, then you can dress the way the dress code is there at the organization. But until then, you want to make that extra positive impression. And so your clothing choices really you want them to reflect a positive professional image. And remember that you want your interviewer to feel like you fit in as one of their team members. So, that means in terms of like your color choices that you'd wear for your interview, you don't want to wear anything that's too flashy, too bright. You want to make sure that you wear sort of what I call the safe colors. So, or safe versions of colors. So, like a navy blue, a dark green, black, a dark purple, those kinds of colors, not bright red or orange or a yellow, like those colors are just too bright for this kind of occasion, and they don't give off the most professional impression. So just make sure that you're conscious of what colors you choose to wear. And then you also want to be conservative with makeup and jewelry. You want to bring a briefcase or a professional style bag. You don't want to bring like a bulky backpack or casual bag that's bulky in any way. Again, it's an in-person interview. So, just make sure that you watch all of that so that the overall impression that you're giving is that, you have a professional presentation about what you're wearing, and that the employer would be able to see, oh, okay, yeah, I could see this person working with us. Okay, so let's touch on telephone interviews, and then we'll touch on virtual interviews right afterwards. So, telephone interviews are often done when employers want to do like kind of a pre screening, and they might want to have a telephone interview with candidates from a larger pool that they're drawing from. So, if they're going to ultimately interview, let's say, 7 candidates, maybe they'll do telephone interviews with 12 candidates and then narrow it down. So you just want to make sure that you're as prepared as possible for these telephone interviews. So you want to set aside a time and a space that'll be quiet, free of distraction. Keep some water nearby in case you need to take a sip of water. Have a copy of your resume and the job description and any other notes, research notes for the company, or any other notes that you've taken that are helpful to you. And the good thing about a telephone interview is that they can't see you. So you can have like, in front of you a whole bunch of materials, with your resume, your notes, the job description, like all of that can be just right at your fingertips because they can't see you. So they don't know that you have all this material there to draw from. So I definitely highly recommend you having it there. And you may not need any of it, but just in case you do, it's really helpful to be able to just have it there and spread out for you. You also want to remember to smile. Negativity can come across easily on the phone, and smiling, it seems kind of like, well, but they can't see me, so why should I smile? But it's really interesting. Your voice can sound different when you smile. When you're just kind of speaking normally, your voice just kind of sounds sort of regular. But if you smile, it sort of like gives a little bit of a lift to your voice. And so you definitely want to remember to do that, and find a happy mood before the call. Find a way to be in a happy mood, right? If dressing up helps you do that, then definitely, uh, dress up for this telephone call, even though they can't see you. Maybe it makes you feel more confident when you're in that business attire. So feel free to do that. But whatever ways that will kind of get you more in the mood and feeling more confident for an interview, you definitely want to do that for your telephone interview. So in terms of your cell phone, you want to make sure that there's no wind, that your battery is charged fully, and that the service is strong for the call. And you also, no gum chewing, no cigarettes, no food, like none of that. I know that when we get nervous, sometimes nervous habits can kick in, but you don't want to do anything that will be distracting while you're on that telephone interview. So you also want to remove any earrings before a call if it's going to hit the phone. So just be careful with that. You also want to make sure that you're listening carefully. So don't interrupt the interviewer. Let them ask their question. And then when it comes time for you to answer, speak slowly and articulately. And once you finish an answer, make sure you allow for a brief pause, because remember, since you're on the telephone, they don't have the visual cues to know when you're finished speaking. So if you give them a pause, then that's their signal, like, okay, I can ask the next question. The other thing too is you can consider taking notes on some of the questions asked, or if there's certain things that you wanted to remember from this interaction, if you're able to do that and stay focused. Now, some of us are kind of more skilled at multitasking than others. So if you can easily do several things at the same time, and you can take notes and still hear their question and still answer fully and in a focused way, then feel free to do that, because they can't see you taking notes, so it doesn't look distracting to them. So feel free to do that if that's something that would be helpful to you and you're able to do that. But if you find that it would be distracting and you might not hear their questions fully, or if you just kind of know about yourself that you just have to really just pay attention and focus, then do that. So definitely know yourself when it comes to that. So never put the interviewer on hold, and don't use a speakerphone. Now, when I say never put the interviewer on hold, that's of course, I mean, there are always exceptions, emergencies that sometimes happen. Maybe you suddenly get a knock on your door and it sounds urgent and you have to answer it. Then of course you say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Excuse me for just one moment." And you just go into the door and take care of it as quickly as you kind of come back and say, "I really apologize for that interruption," and then just carry on. But other than that, definitely don't put them on hold. And don't use a speakerphone. And that's just because it's not considered proper etiquette for an interviewee, a candidate to be using a speakerphone. It's kind of, speakerphones are sort of um, bosses kind of use those in offices, and it's sort of more of like a senior level thing, where people use a speakerphone or they're gathered around a conference table and using a speakerphone. But as the candidate, that's not something that you want to do. So you should always find out their name and contact information so you can send a follow-up thank you note. So make sure that you do that. And then a note on unexpected phone interviews. Just make sure that when you are in the process of a job or internship search, that you are ready, in case you do get an unexpected call from an employer. So, like, carry your resume with you, like a copy of it if you can. Pen, paper, information about your job search. Just keep it on you if you can, at all times. And then that way, if you are somewhere and it is a quiet enough place and your phone rings and you look and you see, I think that may be an employer calling me, and you want to answer, you can. And you have the resume with you have information about your job search, you have your pen, your paper, and so you're prepared. But if they catch you at a time when if they're calling and you're in transit and it's loud where you are, or you're rushing from one place to another, definitely let it go to voicemail. Because if you're not able to speak with them, let them leave a message and you can call them back. And you can just call them back as soon as you can when you are prepared, because you don't want to sound distracted, or you don't want it to be a situation where they can't hear you. And you don't want to sound flustered. So you just want to make sure that if you are going to answer that call, you are ready and it is a quiet place, pretty free of distractions. Okay. Okay, so let's touch on virtual interviews. So whether you're interviewing on Zoom or Skype or Google Meet, whatever it is, you definitely want to make sure that preparing for this virtual interview, you find a quiet, private, well-lit place, free from distractions. So the difference there between obviously the telephone interview and this virtual interview is that it does need to be well lit, because you want to make sure that they can see you well. And you also want to ensure that your internet connection is stable. So make sure that you check that out. You also want to make sure that your computer's audio is working properly, and also test your computer's webcam to make sure that, again, they'll be able to see you fine. And also just close any unnecessary web browser tabs and applications, because those use up, power on your computer, and they can cause problems. So you just want to make sure you only have open what you need to, and then usually the computer runs a lot better that way. So again, you want to dress professionally, avoiding bright colors, sticking again with those earthy kinds of safer colors, and um, you want to have a pen, a notepad, and a copy of your resume next to you. So this is different from the telephone interview in that, you can't just have it all spread out, like a ton of information there in front of you. Instead, it just kind of needs to be in an organized way where, obviously they can't see it, but it's conveniently placed next to your computer, where you could glance down at your resume quickly if you needed to. Maybe on the other side of your computer, you have a pen and a notepad in case you do need to take a note. So, just make sure that you're prepared with all of that. And then also when you're when you're in the middle of the interview, make sure that, when you're listening, that you do remember to nod and smile also, because this time they can actually see you. So smiling is that much more important. And nodding and smiling, it shows that you're engaged in what they're saying, and you look more interested in the experience and learning about their organization and about the position. So make sure that you give them those visual cues. And of course, use hand gestures when appropriate, but don't overdo it. You don't want to be overdoing using your hands, because that's distracting. And then you want to make sure that you remember to place your phone in silent mode, because you don't want your phone ringing in the middle of when you're having this interview. That would obviously be distracting. You don't want that happening. So just make sure that you have your phone in silent mode, on vibrate, whatever it is, so that you're not distracted. Okay, so now let's talk about responding effectively to challenging questions. So you need to be able to effectively respond to the following types of questions, and to always support your responses with specific examples. And we're going to go over some of these questions in just a moment. But just remember that, when they ask you questions, you don't want to just give an answer without supporting it with some type of example, because it's just much more convincing and compelling when you're able to give a specific example. So, for instance, probably the clearest example I can give of that is if they ask you, can you give me, your top 3 strengths? You could say, well, I'm highly organized, I have really strong computer skills and strong interpersonal skills. And you could say that, and then that could be your answer, right? But anybody can say that, right? Instead, you want to make sure that you give examples to support each of these things. So if you say, I'm highly organized, for instance, at my current position or my previous position, I organized a new filing system for, I organized this project, so give an example. And for each of those 3 strengths or skills that you answer for that question, and just support them with the examples, because then if you're able to do that, then the employer sees, oh, okay, they really do have these skills, because you're able to give an example. It's just kind of proof that you really do have them. So you want to make sure that you give examples to support your answers. So let's start with the general questions that are often asked, and just touch on some of these. So for the number 1 question here, tell me about yourself. So this is one of the most common questions during an interview, and it's one of the questions that is most disliked by most candidates. Most candidates do not like this question, and probably most of you are not any different from that, because it's such a wide open question. And so sometimes it can feel intimidating, like, where do I even begin? But when you're asked this question, tell me about yourself, I want you to hear the question as, tell me about your professional self, because that's what they're asking. They're asking, tell me about your professional self. And what that means is, it means, tell me about, school and work related things. So you could, it's kind of like your elevator pitch in a way. So you could, they say, so why don't we begin, you tell me about yourself? You could say, well, I'm in the process of completing my bachelor's degree in psychology. And most recently, I worked at a nonprofit organization. And then you can talk a bit about the kind of work that you did. And then a good way to kind of stop talking, because that's the other thing about answering this question, is knowing how to wrap it up at the end, is you could just say, and I'm really glad to be here today to be able to interview with you and learn more about the position. So something like that. Or, I was very excited for the opportunity to be able, to learn more about your organization and the position, however you want to word it. But that could be sort of like a nice wrap up thing after you tell them a bit about either finishing your degree or you just finished your degree, and what work you are doing or most recently done. So for number 2, what are your strengths or weaknesses? So for strengths, like I was saying a few minutes ago, again, like if they ask you for 3 make sure you give a supporting example for each of those three. They may not ask you a number. They just may say, tell me some of your strengths. And if they say some of your strengths, usually a good number is three. So just give them three. Now, weaknesses, usually they only are kind of asking for one for a weakness. And weaknesses, that's a really tricky question because it's kind of, it's a question that you could easily not answer in a way that's advantageous to you. So you want to make sure that if they ask you about a weakness, that you have a way of turning it into a positive, because you don't want to give the employer any idea that you may not be up to the job or give them doubts about your abilities. So some ideas for weaknesses. I mean, obviously you really need to think about, well, what is a weakness that I have, and then how can I position this in a way that will not give them any doubts about me as a candidate and will turn it to a positive. So one thing I know sometimes that people identify would be that maybe they haven't had the opportunity to learn a second language, and you just have to make sure that a second language is not required for the job that you're applying for. So whatever you choose for a weakness, it can't be something that is required for that position. So if that's not something that they're requiring, is for you to be multilingual, then you could say, well, for a weakness, I would say I have not had the opportunity to learn a second language yet. And that's definitely something that I look forward to being able to do, especially as our workplace is so much more global now. I definitely look forward to mastering another language. So, you're saying something that you haven't fully developed yet, but that you would like to develop and make yourself stronger in the future. And so that's how you're turning it to a positive. So you could do that. Public speaking is another one of those, but public speaking you'd have to be really careful with, because you have to make sure that that's not an aspect of the job you're applying for. So for instance, if I said, well, weakness I would say is I haven't had much of an opportunity to do public speaking. If I said that for a career advisor job interview, then they would think, oh, okay, next candidate, because that's definitely something that you do as a career advisor. But if it's, a position that does not require public speaking, or if it's an internship and that's not something that, you'd be doing as an intern, you could say, well, for weakness, I guess I'd have to say, I haven't had much of an opportunity to do public speaking. And I really look forward to being able to strengthen that skill and have more opportunities to be able to speak in public. So you can mention that as a possibility. But there are other things too that you could say that are what I call safe things. Like, I know that sometimes people say that saying you're a perfectionist is cliche. But if you really are a perfectionist and that's something that you want to answer to this question, then if it's really true about you, you can usually say it, because since it's true, you'll be able to explain it. When it's not true, you really can't. So, and since I myself am a perfectionist, many times in interviews, when they said, what's a weakness, I've said, well, I'd have to say perfectionism is definitely, it's a weakness in that I definitely, I want to make sure that all the work I do is of the highest standards and that I dot every I and cross every T. So sometimes, that's at the cost of my personal time. But I just want to make sure that my work is of high quality and that I make sure that I always meet my deadlines. So you can turn it around to a positive that way if it is perfectionism. So you just have to think about, well, what is a weakness, and then just strategize how to turn it around to a positive. So number three, what makes you the best candidate for this position? Now, being the best candidate for the position, that usually really has to do with your skills and your attributes, right? So you could say, well, I would say what makes me the best candidate for this position is that I have really strong computer skills and interpersonal skills and a really strong work ethic. So it's really going to be like what makes you do the job really well. So you want to draw on your skills as an answer for that. Number four there, what do you know about this company? Again, that's where your employer research is going to come in. And so you're going to want to tell them, well, when I was looking on your website, I was looking to see about your mission and your organization's mission, and then you talk a little about what their mission is, and you could say it really resonates with me, and so I was really happy to see that, and you can just touch on that a bit, and if there are things about their clients or articles you've seen that are interesting, you could also mention that, but definitely, make sure that you let them know that you have knowledge about their company if they're asking about that. Number five there, where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years? So for this question, you just want to make sure that you are um, really keeping in mind, what I call the psychology behind the question. Like, why would they be asking this? Where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years? It's not just out of curiosity. It's because they want to know when you answer this question, is your answer in alignment with you taking this job? Because if, for instance, the job is at a nonprofit organization, let's say you're finishing your degree in psychology, the job's at a nonprofit organization, and they say, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? And you said, well, I say in 5 years, I'll be wanting to go to law school. So I say definitely pursuing my law degree. So that definitely is not in alignment with them hiring you for this job, because then why would they want to invest in, helping you develop in their organization if they feel like you're just going to take off and go get a law degree? Now, it may be true that you are going to take off and get a law degree, but they don't need to know anything about that. You want to keep this focused on the part of you that is, focused on their organization in this kind of position. So you want to be sort of more general in your answer. You want to say, in 5 years, I definitely see myself in a position like this where I'm learning more about the organization, I'm taking on more responsibility and just growing within the organization. So it's more of that kind of answer. Number six there, why are you looking for a new job? So this answer, you definitely want to be focusing on what you're going toward, not what you're leaving from. So you don't ever want to answer this question with, "Oh, I don't like my boss now," or um, I, you know, I'm not challenged enough at this job, or anything along those lines. It always needs to be like a positive and what you're going towards. So you're looking for a new job because you're completing your degree and you wanted to attain a position that's more in alignment, with your education now, or you want a job so that you can take on more responsibility, and you can learn more about the field, or advancing in your career in some kind of way. So that's definitely the direction that you want to be answering that question in. And then number seven there, do you have any questions? So usually at the end of an interview, an employer will always ask, do you have any questions for me? And when they ask you that, make sure that you have questions ready, because even if, let's say, you get a particularly talkative interviewer and they answer a bunch of questions that you kind of had in the back of your mind, you still have to come up with at least one or two questions anyway, even if they answer everything that you prepared to ask, because employers, they're just kind of they're a bit judgmental about candidates when they don't have questions. Like it triggers their worry about whether, is the candidate just not interested in this position or organization? How could they not have any questions? Or are they not intelligent enough to think of questions? Or, they just, it just doesn't go over well if you don't have questions. So I say over prepare your questions. So normally you have time to ask, I don't know, maybe two, three, four questions at the end. And so over prepare, like have 8 questions ready to ask, just in case you do get a talkative interviewer and that interviewer, answers half of your questions that you had prepared. You still have 4 left that you can ask. So you definitely want to over prepare that just in case. And we're going to go over shortly some potential questions that you can ask, because that can be tricky too, trying to figure out, well, what should I ask them? But before we talk about that, let's talk about behavioral type of questions. So these questions are ones that are like, tell me about this. So describe a time when you did this, or give me an example of a time. These are questions that are very focused on having you give examples from your experience that demonstrate, what you're capable of. So for number one there, describe a time when you were faced with a stressful situation that demonstrates your coping skills. So you definitely want to be thinking about something either uh, at your current job, at a previous job, where there was a stressful situation that came up, and how you worked through it, and you demonstrated your effective coping skills. And so you would just talk through that, and just describe how you were able to do that well. And what I'll say though is that uh, you're going to get a handout of this interviewing guide that has these questions in there, and there are more as well. So after this webinar, you'll definitely get a copy of the PowerPoint, and you'll get a copy of the recording of this webinar, along with a handout that has this information. So before your interviews, absolutely, like, look at all the behavioral questions that are in there and come up with examples that you could give to answer them. And if you do that, then most likely, no matter what behavioral questions they ask you, you'll be able to draw from those examples that you come up with to answer these particular questions. Even if their questions are a bit different than this, it's still, you can often draw on the same kinds of examples. So number two, tell me about something you tried to accomplish but failed. So this is kind of a tricky question, like the weakness question, where they're saying, tell me about something you tried to accomplish but failed. And what you have to keep in mind with this question is, you don't want to tell them something that failed because it was your fault, right? It needs to be something that failed because of the situation. So for instance, if your boss asked you to work on a project and you were given a certain budget, and you started working on it and you were very excited, to begin working on it, and then your boss the next week said, listen, there's been a change and our budget's been cut in half, then you could say, and so, I was disappointed, obviously, that the budget was cut in half, but I, reworked things, and I figured out how, with the resources that you now had, I could accomplish, and carry out this project, and then the project was successful. So, you turn it around to a positive, just like you did the weakness question. So number three, describe a time when you had to deal with a very irate customer or coworker. And for there, a lot of that answer is going to be about, you made sure that you listened very carefully to your coworker or to the irate customer. So you made sure that they understood that you're hearing them, and then you addressed, whatever their issue was, whether you needed to consult with someone else, or whether you need to get back to them, or whether there was something you could do right then and there to assist them. But it's going to be very much about, being able to calmly listen and respond and meet the needs of the irate customer, or your coworker. And so the thing that you have to be really careful about when it comes to that type of question is, you just want to make sure that you aren't describing the irate customer or the irate coworker in negative terms, because they'll watch for that. Like, are you saying, oh, and this customer was so awful, and oh, and they were difficult? Like, don't complain about anybody. You just sort of describe them like, oh, this customer was very angry because this happened, or this client was very angry because this happened, and so I listened to them, and I was very empathetic, and then I was able to resolve their issue. So you just kind of make sure that you're not being judgmental about them, but that you're describing them in a way where you want to really help them and turn the situation around for them. So number four, tell me about a time when you set a goal and achieved it. And so with this one, again, remember psychology behind the question. What kind of goal are you going to be describing? So you want to describe a goal that is as related as you can to the job that you're applying for. So if there's a goal at a job that you have now, or a recent job that you've had, that a project that you accomplished, or some type of goal in the workplace that's related to the type of goal you may have at this new job, then you go with that. Or if there's something related to school, whether it's completing your degree, you could talk about that because that's in the professional realm, and completing your degree is only going to make you more knowledgeable for the job that you would get if they hired you. So you could talk about that, but not personal goals. So definitely steer clear of well, I had a goal to have a large family, and so I have 7 children. You definitely don't want to be mentioning anything along those lines because again, that's your business. You don't want to go into that personal realm like that. But I would say that there is one exception with personal goals, and that would be athletic goals, because athletic goals are safe. So if, for instance, you made a goal to run the New York City Marathon, and then you decided to train for it, and you really worked very hard at training for it, and then you were able to run it and did it successfully. You could talk about something like that. Like that would be okay because athletic goals, they show a lot of perseverance and discipline, and they show your organizational skills, and your ability to stick with things, and perseverance, like all of that. And those are all applicable to the workplace easily, and it's not getting too personal. So you could definitely use something like that if that was one of the better examples that you have. And then number 5 there, give me an example of a time when you used good judgment and logic to solve a problem. So again, think about something as related as you can to the job that you're applying for. But again, remember, school is something you can draw from too, if there isn't anything quite as related. But you just want to use a positive example where you used your good judgment and your logic, and you solved the problem, and you just describe how you were able to do it. Okay. Okay, and then let's touch on potential questions to ask the interviewer. So some of the potential questions here, number 1 there, what would be a typical workday? What would a typical workday be like for a person in this position? That can be a good question to ask. What are some of the major challenges and rewards of this job? That can be a good one as well. It'll give you more information about the job you're applying for. Number 3 there, what are some of the responsibilities of the people I've been working most closely with? That can also be really good. For what do you hope I would accomplish in this position in 3 months, 6 months, a year? That also gives you kind of more information about what their expectations are for someone in this role, and that can be helpful for you to know. And then this last question here, when do you expect to make a decision on selecting a person for this position? That can be, if you're going to ask that type of question, usually that's good for your last question that you're going to ask, because it tells them that you'd like to know kind of what their timeline is, and that's a good sort of like concluding kind of question. So you can feel free to ask that one as well. But there are many other kinds of questions that you can have based on the research that you do on their website and about the organization, or just even just any of the research that you do prior to getting ready for this interview. If there are questions that occur to you that are appropriate, go for it. But just remember, you don't want to ask about salary or benefits, and that is because it's just considered taboo. It's considered not appropriate to ask about those. Now, if the employer brings those up, that's fine. If they introduce it and they ask you something related to salary or benefits, then you can answer, because obviously they're inviting that subject in. But if they say, do you have any questions for me? And then the first question out of your mouth is, well, I see you posted a salary range. I'm just kind of wondering, given my experience and education, where do you think I'd fall in that salary range? Or or maybe they didn't post a salary range. Or what is the salary? Like you don't want to go there. And that's because you give an impression like maybe you're not so interested in the mission of this organization, or maybe you're not so interested in learning more about them and the position. All you want is the paycheck. And so you just don't want to ever give that impression. So again, don't bring that up as question. Just if they introduce it, fine. But otherwise, you want to ask different types of questions. Okay, so let's touch on best practices. On the day of your interview, make sure that you know where you're going if it's an in-person interview, and arriving at your destination at least 10 to 15 minutes early, so you have time to get through the lobby and up to where you need to be. Remember, first impressions are extremely important. And when the interviewer calls your name, make sure that you stand up, establish that eye contact, remembering to smile and greet them. So some of the do's here, you want to make sure that you are showing confidence, positive body language, maintaining eye contact. Just try to stay conscious of all that. You want to be attentive, alert, and courteous. And if you're asked to complete an application right then and there, make sure you answer every question, even if they have your resume. You don't want to ever be difficult in this process. And if they're asking you to answer the questions, on an application, and you say, oh, well, you have my resume. Do you need me to still fill this out? If they're asking you to fill it out, it means they need you to fill it out. So you don't want to be resistant in any way, because then remember, everything you do during this process for interviewing, they're thinking this is what you probably would be like as an employee. And if you're giving them problems about filling out an application because they already have your resume and you don't want to waste your time and have them fill it out, then they'll wonder, what would you be like as an employee when they ask you to do something? Will you be resistant? So just be careful with all of that. And you want to make sure that you're always stressing your qualifications without exaggeration. You want to be honest, but you want to make sure that you are your own spokesperson, you are your own PR person, that you are letting them know, what skills and experience that you have. And be prepared to discuss the salary range, but not until the employers introduce the subject, like I mentioned. And a good way to figure out salary ranges, if they don't list it, is on salary.com. Again, that's salary.com. So make sure you look there. So some of the don'ts: make sure that you don't complain, not about the weather, about your training, your former employers, or personal problems. Even if it's an in-person interview and it's raining really hard, it's like practically a monsoon on the way there, and you get there and you're a little soaked. If the employer says, oh my goodness, wow, that must have been a difficult journey, you don't want to launch into, oh, it was awful, and like just like, oh yes, wow, it's raining very hard, and then just move on. Like, don't take any invitation to complain about something. You just want to make sure you keep it focused on what you have positively to offer the employer. Also, don't interrupt or think ahead of the conversation. Try to stay as present as you can and listen carefully to what they're asking you. Don't be in a hurry to ask questions. Wait until the employer invites them. Remember that as the interviewer, they're the one running this meeting. They're in charge of it. So you want to make sure that they guide you with their questions. You don't want to all of a sudden start interjecting questions for them or something. Make sure that you don't become relaxed and informal by offering personal details about yourself, even if the interviewer has an informal interviewing style. Because there are some interviewers, particularly like recruiters, like for human resources, for instance. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll have an informal way of interviewing you to see if you'll relax and not stay professional. And so it can be kind of a test. Some interviewers, just that's what they want to do. They want to weed out people who will not continue to be appropriate and professional during an interview, and will start offering personal details about themselves. So you don't want to do that. You want to just keep focused on your schooling and your work, and the skills and attributes you have to offer for the position. And then also, don't offer any unfavorable information about yourself. So, because I know that sometimes when I'm working with students, there's this whole like, oh, well, but they need to, I'm a tell it like it is kind of person, and I need to give a balanced representation of myself. And so you just have to remember that this is a first impression with the employer. The interview is like an opportunity for a first impression. And so when you're doing a first impression, you're always focusing on the positive aspects of who you are as a candidate and what you have to offer, not giving them this balanced picture. They don't need a balanced picture, because if they hire you, they'll get to know the whole you. That's fine. But in this part of the process, it's just really important to put that best foot forward. Okay, and then closing the interview, you want to make sure that you get each interviewer's business card, right? You want to thank the interviewer for his or her time. Send a thank you email or letter, but probably email because it's much faster. within 24 hours, preferably, but 24 to 48 hours. Make sure you do that. Some students ask me, like, do I really need to do that? Is that really necessary? And I would say, yes, it is necessary, because it can be the thing that distinguishes you from other candidates that maybe won't take the time to do it, or won't realize that that's something that employers expect these days. Like, they expect to receive a thank you email from candidates when they take the time to interview you. And then follow up with the interviewer, either by phone or email, if you haven't been notified of a decision within a few weeks. So make sure that you do follow up, because that can also be something that happens is they get distracted during their process of hiring someone. If they are very busy with other projects at work and they're responsible for hiring a new person, sometimes they get off track. And if they get a follow-up message from you a few weeks later, then it can pull them back on track, and they can go, wow, this person follows up, and I really appreciate that initiative, and it could really distinguish you. So just make sure that you definitely follow up. And it also gives you good information to know, are they still in the process of looking for someone, if they filled the position, or what the status is. Okay. Okay, so before I answer your questions, I just want to make sure that I mention we have two programs coming up that would be great for you to participate in, our online career meetups. And we have Careers in Business and Technology. That one's next week. It's next Thursday, April 11th, from 6 to 7:30. And in these slides, the registration's there. And you'll also be getting emails from our office about it. And then we've got Careers in Healthcare, Psychology, Sociology, and Human Relations on Wednesday, May 8th. And that's also 6 to 7:30. So please feel free to join us for either of those programs or both of those programs. And then let me make sure that I can answer as many of your questions as I can. So let me just open the chat here and see what we have. Okay. Okay. I only see a couple of questions here. So, I mean, we don't have a lot of time, but we have a few minutes. So if anyone still has a question, please feel free to put it in the chat now, so that I can address that question. But someone is asking about whether whether they should think that it's a bad sign if the interview is shorter, is like only 30 minutes or so. If, like, the longer the interview is, the better, the chances are of getting the job. And so what I would say to that question is that it's really hard to know what an employer's process is when it comes to how long they're interviewing candidates for. Some organizations have really strict guidelines around that, and they say, we want you to interview each candidate for only 30 minutes, stay as close to that time period as you can, and then with the final round, we'll spend an hour with our finalists. So that would mean then, if they interviewed you for 30 minutes, then that's not a negative, because that's what they're doing with everyone, for that initial first interview. And then it's the final interview that they'll take longer with you. So it could be that. So you just don't know what their process is. So don't be discouraged if your interview is 30 minutes and that's it. You were expecting like an hour, 45-minute, or an hour-long interview. Don't worry about that, because again, it really varies, just kind of depending on what the employer's process is. Okay, let's see, a couple more questions coming in. All right. Are there always multiple interview rounds when applying for jobs? And when's a good time to follow up after a first or second interview? Okay, so I would say that almost always there are multiple interview rounds for jobs. Most of the time, employers do not just interview you once and then hire you. I would say internships are an exception. For internships, usually it is one interview, because it is an internship. It's not, a full-time job. So I think they feel like they can make that decision after interviewing you once. But when it comes to, a full-time or even a part-time job, because it's ongoing and it's an investment they're making in hiring this person, then usually they do want at least 2 rounds. And there's some, particularly it seems like universities and nonprofit organizations, the ones who are most guilty of this, will sometimes have 3 and 4 round interviews. Like they'll keep bringing you back. And so definitely expect, multiple interview rounds, because, that is the norm. Um, Now, when's a good time to follow up after first or second interview? So, if you're able to ask the question when they say, "Do you have any questions for me?" If you make your last question, "Yes, I was wondering what your time frame is for hiring someone for the position," then that will give you a sense of when the good time is to follow up. So if you can ask that question, it would be great for you to do that, because then if they say, "Well, we're hoping to hire somebody, within the next few weeks," then in 2 weeks you could follow up with them because they said they'd like to make the hire in the next few weeks. So that's a faster time frame. But if they say, well, we're at the very beginning of the interviewing process, and so we're initially meeting with candidates now, and and then we're going to move forward, then I would say maybe wait 3 weeks and then follow up with them. So give a bit more time if their timeline seems vague. And then if you don't ask that question, then you can go with 2.5 weeks and then follow up with them and reiterate your interest, when you follow up. Okay. Another question we have here. What should we do if we don't have an answer prepared for one of the questions asked? And that's a good question too, because yeah, you can't always have a question prepared for, when they ask you a question. I mean, you can try to come up with as many answers as you can from these practice questions that you'll be receiving. But they may ask you something that is not anywhere in here. And so if that's the case and you don't have an answer right away, then just, don't fear pausing for a moment. So you could say, that's a good question if you want to say that, or you could say, and then think for a moment and just let something come to you. Because, um, let's say they're asking you about your technology skills and they say, um, so, tell me, because we really, really want to hire someone who has experience, extensive experience with Excel. Um, do you have extensive experience with Excel? And if you don't, and so you're not sure what to say in response to that, just pause for a moment and just say, well, um, I have some experience with Excel and I really enjoy using the program, and I actually learn computer programs very quickly. So I'm definitely confident that I would be able to get up to speed very quickly. So, you'll want to answer in ways that will reassure them that you have the skills and the ability to be able to meet the demands of the job. So that's kind of what you want to do. But again, don't forget to don't worry about pausing for a moment to gather your thoughts, because that's perfectly normal. That is expected, and you can do that for a moment. And if you can just do that, then that will allow a moment for some kind of answer to come to you. Okay.